cooperating to make sure that everything that can be saved and moved has been moved. We have been sending trucks from the city department of transportation, and the collaboration between the state and between the city of Paris is very, very close and very tight tonight.
Sure.
So
and
things are being under control.
So some things have been taken out of the church then? Some things have been rescued?
Yes. Some paintings, and yes, there have been elements, being taken away, because when it started at the roof. So there was, the reaction of the bishop team and I would say the administration, of course, to react,
yes,
to protect, the values they could take out. So they did.
Well, that's good to hear, because we didn't know whether anything at all had been saved from the church. So that is wonderful to hear that at least some things.
Yeah. There are many things being saved and transported by our services and the state services.
And then what is the latest that you were hearing from the Paris Fire Brigade about the status of the fire? Have they been able to put any timeline on it, or is that also an unknown at this point?
It's absolutely unknown, and we have to be extremely careful in words.
Of course. Now, this cathedral is not only iconic to Paris, it is iconic to the world. 12 million tourists come every year to come and visit the cathedral. What sort of impact to tourism can you imagine this fire will have to Paris and to France?
Well, the feeling I have, there will be a lot of solidarity, because the cathedral actually belongs to the world. And we have been receiving through social networks already some proposals of supporting, and it's very moving, because everybody feels like it's their own. Yes. And the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, and the President Macron, they were together there, and I think they want to join the efforts. And actually, we will ask, I'm sure, for an international campaign to support, the repair, because what we have to have in mind, once the fire is over, once we are sure every citizen, every Parisian is safe and every tourist is safe, that Paris has always rebuilt whatever has been destroyed by people or by fire or by accident. So the future will be with us, and Notre-Dame will live.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. So plans are sort of already underway to rebuild the cathedral. Then are there very specific, notes and plans that still exist that would allow the cathedral to be more or less reconstructed as it once stood?
The wonderful historians, architects, and specialists of landmark treasures, and they will, of course, meet and exchange, and I'm sure, within the coming weeks, we will absolutely restart, and there will be a very positive attitude to save this beloved, jewel of the world. And thank you so much for actually, being able to support this through the waves and through radio and the media.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the world will be supporting your rebuilding efforts. Can you talk a little bit about the impact on the Catholic community that this fire will have, especially since we are in the middle of Holy Week?
Well, you're right. It's Easter holiday, and the Catholic community is, of course, very attached to Notre-Dame Cathedral. Catholics come from all around the world to visit Notre-Dame and to pray. So tonight, the message also of our mayor, Mrs. Hidalgo, was to be close to the community, the Catholic community, as she went right away to be with the bishop, Monseigneur Chauvet, to be with him. He was, when I had him on the phone, he was crying, and wow. Like a child and like a person lost, seeing his cathedral, like you said, was in fire. He said it's just not believable. So, of course, our thoughts go to our Catholic friends.
Of course. And, Christophe, do you think that the Yellow Vest protests will pause this weekend?
Well, it's always difficult in a democracy, to make connection between demonstration. President Macron was supposed to speak tonight on television, and he had to cancel. So there will be a national, of course, moment, with Paris and with the nations in Europe, I hope, to actually pay tribute and be maybe a bit silent, with this big tragedy. But it's very hard to say because, social democracy is always alive.
Of course, of course. Can you speak to us a bit about the efforts of the firefighters? I know that they have to be particularly careful. Not only, are they trying to put out this terrible fire, but they're trying to do as little damage to the structure and the artifacts inside as they do it. Are there particular methods that they are using?
Well, as you know, we have been through sometimes sad experiences, and in the past, with what happened at the Bataclan and what happened at, in different situations. So the firemen we have, they are extremely competent, and our heroes, the way they're so professional and the way they actually got organized under the authority of our general of the firemen is just, could you excuse me 1 second? Sorry.
No problem. You are the Deputy Mayor of Paris. This is a very busy night for you. We definitely appreciate your time. Christophe, we're going to let you go because we know you have a lot of things to do this evening.
I'm sorry, I had to react because I'm actually, out of the crisis office, and I was outside, and there were some people moving next to me. So.
Oh, of course. Well, then, if you have a moment, I just have one last question for you. We understand that the Ile de la Cité...
Sure, no, go ahead.
We understand that the Ile de la Cité has been totally evacuated. How many, more or less, residents live on the Ile de la Cité, and where will they be staying this evening?
Well, we have decided with Mayor Hidalgo to open local city halls and sports facilities in case, they would like not to stay home, or if they're not able to join their houses. It's a question of about, 1,000, 2,000 people concerned. But also we have contacted the hotels around Ile de la Cité and Ile Saint-Louis and the center of Paris. So I think everybody is actually cooperating. So there will be a roof and a bed for everyone tonight.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And finally, I have a question. We understand that Parisian prosecutors are also looking into the fire. Do you have a sense that there could be some charges brought against someone or any entity?
As always, when you have such a huge tragedy and such a big fire on a landmark monument, of course, all questions are being asked. So we have to let, especially when there is some construction work going on. So we have absolutely to let the police and the scientific police work to find the elements. But we need time.
Of course. Now, I know that we don't yet know how the fire started, but do firefighters know where in the church the fire originated?
It started from what we saw because we were in the meeting. When it started in the roof. In the roof. And that is near... That's where we saw.
And that is near scaffolding.
Where it looks like where the statues were taken down. Because last week I was with the bishop when the day they were taking the statues down, from the roof. So it looks like it started there. But, I don't know really precisely.
Of course, the investigation continues. Well, Christophe Girard, we appreciate your time so much. We know that this is a devastating evening for you and for all of Paris, but the world is with you. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for doing this interview. It's very important because, we love all English-speaking people to come a lot.
Oh, yes.
And, we don't like Brexit. We don't like Brexit too much.
Well, you know, we're here in America, so it doesn't really affect us one way or the other.
I know, but you know, English citizens are our cousins too.
Absolutely.
I know we're in America.
No, I know.
Great America.
I'm teasing you, and you know, so many people have visited, obviously, Notre-Dame, and I have to say, on a personal note, I was engaged in that beautiful church, so it means something to me personally very much as well.
Oh my God! So, yes, of course. Well,
yes.
we would build it for you.
Yeah. Well, for the world. Christophe Girard, we thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, and good night, America.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano, picking up our coverage here from my colleague Tanya Rivero. Let's go to CBS News correspondent Elaine Cobb on the phone with us now from Paris. So, Elaine, give us an update. What is the very latest?
Elaine, the local mayor says they are confident that they can save the main structure of the church and the two towers, but the interior, all the woodwork, all of the roof has been burnt. There's still some fire being fought by the firefighters here. There are a lot of police in the area, and the streets around the Ile de l'Estité still blocked off. All of the locals evacuated. There's been a lot of interest from locals here, of course, people taking to high spots in the city to look down on the fire. A lot of tweeting and notes on social media from people about how sad they feel and about the loss of a friend, this part of Paris that is such an integral part of the city.
And can you talk about that a little bit more, Elaine? When one thinks of the skyline of the city of Paris, you think of the Eiffel Tower, of course, but you also do think of Notre-Dame.
Absolutely. It's right in the heart of the city, both literally and figuratively. And it's, even though it's at the lowest part of the city, on the banks of the Seine, it is visible. And that spire is a landmark that people would see as they were coming through the city. Or if you're up high, if you were at Montmartre, for example, looking down over the city, it is one of the most easily recognizable parts of Paris. And people would say, well, there's Notre-Dame. And of course, it was always on people's to-do list to have a photograph taken in front of Notre-Dame. So,
Elaine,
so it's been very important.
And tell us about the efforts here as we continue to watch these live pictures from Paris as authorities try to get this situation under control. We've been watching this here on CBSN for several hours now. Just how massive a response has this been for Parisian authorities?
It's been a huge response, and it's been very difficult because, of course, it's in a very built-up area. The island is it doesn't have a lot of access to it, and there are very narrow streets. The narrow street beside the church has a lot of restaurants and cafes and homes, and it's been very difficult for them, of course, to make sure the fire did not spread there. And so having firefighters and police to keep people away, and everyone had to be evacuated from the area, of course. The locals have all been moved out. They're staying nearby. And the restaurants, of course, shut down and tourists taken away. And there is a hospital just there. And, of course, all the patients had to be taken out. Not an easy task, of course.
And Elaine, I wonder, have you had an opportunity to talk to people there in Paris? What are they telling you as they watch this fire continue to burn?
First of all, most people are shocked. This was so unexpected, and it's been so fast. This building has been there since the 12th century. It survived the French Revolution when so many other buildings were sacked by the revolutionaries. It survived the 100-Year War. It survived 2 world wars in the last century. Now, in the space of one evening, it has gone up in flames and much of it destroyed. And that's a terrible shock to people. And also, it's a bad time for French people to lose a monument like that after a wave of attacks here that have hit people, after the violence on the streets by the Yellow Vest protesters. To watch such a beautiful building and such an integral part of Paris just go up in flames has been such a shock to everyone. And there's a lot of sadness as well, and people walking around not quite sure what to do, frankly.
And Elaine, we heard President Trump here in the U.S. Extend his thoughts and prayers to people there in Paris as Notre-Dame continues to burn. I wonder what we've heard from French President Emmanuel Macron.
Well, he went to the site, but he didn't speak there. Of course, there are no other people around, but he tweeted that it was a great loss for France, for him, and there have also been a lot of tweets and messages from other European leaders, including the head of the European Commission, Donald Tusk, from Angela Merkel, from Theresa May, and a lot of leaders expressing their sympathy, and also from UNESCO, because, of course, it is a UNESCO heritage site. And even when I was speaking to the spokesman for the cathedral last year about the renovation project, he said, you know, this isn't just a French monument. It's not a Parisian monument. It's very much a world monument. This is something that is known everywhere and is in the heart of many people everywhere.
And in addition to that, Elaine, I think some may be wondering about injuries. Can you tell us what you've heard from authorities regarding any possible injuries to either civilians or tourists or firefighters battling the blaze?
Well, City Hall say that nobody was injured and there were no deaths, thankfully. They, because the fire started, it would appear in the roof, and they got people out very, very quickly, and then they moved everyone back very quickly. In effect, the flames were more interior, if you will, in that space, so that people were able to be brought back out very quickly, and then, of course, they evacuated neighbouring buildings and all the people who live on the island, just to make sure, in case the Notr-Dam collapsed or in case the fire spread.
All right, Elaine Cobb, CBS News correspondent, reporting to us from Paris. Elaine, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let's go to John Sopel, joining us now from our Washington, D.C. bureau. He is the North America correspondent for BBC News and a former Paris correspondent. John, first of all, your thoughts at this hour. It has now been several hours since we first got word that Notre-Dame was burning. This is a cathedral you, as a Paris correspondent, obviously know well. Tell us what your questions are, what your thoughts are at this point.
Well, I think the overriding thought is one of profound sadness, slight disbelief, and a kind of aching feeling that this can't have happened, because it is such a monument in Paris. And for any of your viewers who've been to Paris, and I suspect a large number have, you go to this very beautiful city. It's full of beautiful monuments, but this one in particular stands out, and you think, well, it's been standing there for 850 years. It took 200 years to build, and in the space of about an hour and a half, you saw it kind of inwardly collapse under the force of the flames that were going through the building, and just this profound sense that a piece of our cultural heritage for Europe, for the world, one of the world's most famous monuments, has been destroyed, and destroyed so quickly.
And John, I know our time is short here, but in the few moments we have left, what are the questions that you have? As someone who is familiar with the city of Paris, we just heard Elaine Cobb discuss some of the logistical challenges of fighting this fire, being that it is on the Ile de la Cité and that it is surrounded by some very narrow streets. Are there questions that you have regarding how this fire was actually fought?
Well, my questions are, how was it? I mean, look, we've known about the geography and its location on the banks of the River Seine and the tightness of the streets. Presumably there must have been a plan in place for what to do if a fire erupts at such a central landmark in Paris. It seemed very slow to respond, and it seemed an awful long time before kind of fire engines were in place. So I think that is one of the questions. I think also the kind of wisdom of some of the restoration work that was going on, that they will want to look at this. But I suspect those are the questions for tomorrow. Tonight, Paris and probably the rest of the world will be mourning that we seem so powerful with our interconnectivity and being able to reach each other at any moment, but a fire takes hold, and yet all the fire services in Paris seemed powerless to stop it.
How do you think this is going to affect the city of Paris and Parisians moving forward?
Oh, I think that this is going to be a profound scar. I think it's coming in Holy Week, and I think an awful lot of Catholics who live in Paris will feel a sense of grievous loss that the Church of Our Lady is kind of almost destroyed. I think that it will knock self-confidence, but I think, you know, Paris is a country that has rebuilt before. It won't be it's not the first fire. It has survived other awful moments in its history. and I suspect there will be long searching questions, but you know, it's completely different of course to 9/11, but you know, the spirit that we saw in New York that September day, I suspect we'll see on the streets of Paris as well tomorrow.
I saw on social media at one point what appeared to be, although I couldn't verify it at the moment, a crowd of people singing Ave Maria somewhere in proximity to Notre-Dame. Can you just talk about, for those of the Catholic faith and non-Catholics as well, what this building, this structure actually came to symbolize there in the heart of Paris?
If you Google the centre of Paris, midpoint Paris, you come up with Notre-Dame. It has been there, it is the kind of anchor. The rest of the city has grown out from it. Actually, there's not that much of medieval Paris left. There's a bit in the Marais, which is very close by, and there's a bit in the Latin Quarter, just across the river from the church. Much more of Paris was built in the 19th century, but this is the anchor. This is the heartbeat of Paris. And if you go to that city, you're going to see the Eiffel Tower from any vantage point. But the building that you most want to see is Notre-Dame. And that is why there'll be such a profound sense of shock and disbelief and sadness tonight that their city and the kind of landmark of their city is in flames.
John, as we await some more information from authorities, I wonder if you have any kind of personal reflections. I recall the first time I was able to actually go visit Notre-Dame, I was a teenage kid on essentially what was an exchange program, and I remember being quite awed by the whole experience and staring up at those enormous stained glass windows, and it was sort of this hush that fell over our group. Do you have any kind of remembrances like that as we continue to await additional details?
My remembrances of Paris it was, even though I had lived there for 4 years, you would still turn certain corners as you were driving through the city, and you were just struck by its beauty and its majesty. And Ile de la Cité is the most fantastic part of Paris. I mean, it just kind of, it is the city of light. It is the city that gave us the Enlightenment. This church predates that by many hundreds of years, but it is just one of those central pieces of kind of iconography of France, if you like, and the kind of the ridiculous gargoyles, the flying buttresses, all those kind of architectural features of Notre-Dame that made it so unique and so special for so many people.
All right, John Sopel joining us from our Washington, D.C. Bureau. John, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it. Let's bring in Kevin Murphy. He's a professor and chair of the History of Art Department at Vanderbilt University. And Kevin, thank you so much for being here. You and I were talking off camera a moment ago about the questions that you had as we watched this fire progress. There was one moment in particular that really kind of piqued your interest. Can you talk about that? What were your questions? What was that moment?
So my major question is what transpired when the spire fell. Because as we discussed before, and as people who know medieval architecture will attest, the structure itself is basically stone. It's a stone vaulted structure that, so the more or less ceiling over the main space or the nave is made out of stone that's supported on columns and on the famous buttresses on the exterior of the structure. But the roof above it is, of course, made out of wood. And so clearly that burned, and the spire, which also had a lot of wood in it, also burned and fell, as we all saw earlier today. It crashed.
Dramatic video that was.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, your previous commentator spoke about 9/11. That was my 9/11 moment. You know, it was like watching the towers fall, to see the spire fall. So my question is, what happened when it fell onto those stone vaults? Were they adequately strong that they withstood the force of the falling spire, or did they sustain damage? And so that would be my question. I don't suppose we'll know until tomorrow, at least.
And what else, as you look at these images, you know, with this fire continuing to burn this hour, what else is it that you are wondering about as someone who's very familiar with this kind of architecture?
So my question is, what is the fire that's now burning on the interior of the cathedral? We've heard talk about the objects on the inside, some of which have been removed, but it does seem that there's something burning inside this basically stone structure. So my question would be, you know, what is that? What's the extent of that fire? what's the amount of heat that's being produced in it that might create structural issues and also, of course, cause damage for the stained glass, which we're all very concerned about.
And when you hear authorities, our Elaine Cobb was telling us a moment ago, authorities saying that the structure itself has been saved, what does that tell you?
Well, it doesn't tell me very much yet. Because the structure is mostly stone, so we would expect that it wouldn't be as susceptible to fire as with the parts that have a lot of wood in them, or cast iron, which could have been introduced in the 19th century and earlier restorations, that would be susceptible to bending and even melting eventually. So I'm not surprised that the structure is still there. The question is what damage it sustained, and we don't know that yet.
So there were reportedly renovations going on at the time. Typically, when renovations take place to a structure as old as this, are there efforts to sort of retrofit fire protection systems into those kinds of buildings, or is it frankly just logistically quite difficult given that they are so old and not at all designed the way a more modern building would be?
Right, of course. So any fire suppression would be, introduced beyond what was already historically there. But usually an effort is made to do that. But of course, I don't know anything about what the fire issues were in the current restoration, whether there were steps taken to introduce sprinklers or other kinds of fire suppression, but that would be a consideration in most restoration projects. But I simply don't have information about that in this case.
When you talk about the cultural significance of Notre-Dame, can you describe that for people who maybe have not had a chance to be there or really understand its place in history? This is a building that, as Elaine Cobb was saying, survived the French Revolution. It survived 2 world wars. Can you talk about its significance?
Right. So its significance is long-standing as it was seen, it was the Cathedral of Paris, but because Paris was the capital, it was also seen as the Cathedral of France. So we heard the Vice Mayor of Paris talk about its global significance. That argument was made as early as the 19th century when efforts were made to restore it, that it was important to France, but it was also important to the whole world, that it was becoming a tourist destination even in the 19th century. But, before that, there had always been an enormous amount of attention paid to its significance, yes.
I'm sorry, oh, okay. So we are listening, but we don't have a translation yet, which is why we're not bringing this to you in full. There you see French President Emmanuel Macron, but once we get that translation, we'll bring that to you. Continue on, Kevin, and we're going to continue to monitor. And what is it that he said? I'm sorry, control room? He's expressing his sympathies and obviously thoughts with the firefighters as they continued their work. So we are working to get this simultaneously translated for you. As we do that, let's continue our conversation here with Kevin Murphy. Pardon the interruption here,
Sure,
Kevin.
no problem. So you mentioned the French Revolution. Well, at that moment, that was the moment at which the church was disbanded in France. And that was the point at which the church was actually attacked. And Victor Hugo, who we've heard talked about a lot today, is the author of Notr-Dam de Paris, the famous 1831 novel in which he popularized the building. He also wrote a famous essay which was called War on Demolishers, in which he got people to stop demolishing these monuments that were attached to the monarchy and to the church in the wake of the revolution, and tried to argue for a restoration campaign. So after the revolution, when the church is reestablished under Napoleon, it becomes very important to him, and we've heard about the events that took place around Napoleon there. And Napoleon initiated a restoration campaign which lasted for decades, which was aimed at reversing the destruction that had taken place during the revolution and also during the period in which the church was really disbanded.
Did I read that he was crowned there?
Yes.
That is
Right.
the case. Can you give us a sense of some of the other moments in history that have taken place in that building?
Well, if we zoom forward to the late 19th century, to the construction in 1889 of the Eiffel Tower, Notre-Dame really took its place in a lot of discussions at that point as the other major monuments. So there was the Tower of Notre-Dam, which was very tall. And then there was the nave of Notre-Dame, which was soaring in this kind of vast space. So those two things, the Tower of Eiffel's Tower and the nave of Notre-Dame, were the two iconic buildings in 1889 as France marked its 100-year anniversary of the French Revolution.
And you were telling me the spire that we saw actually is of a more modern, recent time. I think some people might not be aware of that. Can you talk about that?
Right. So the spire was part of a restoration that was begun in the mid-1840s. And the architects responsible for that were Eugène Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc, who was probably the most famous architectural theorist and restorer the 19th century in France, and his collaborator Jean-Baptiste Lassus, who died in the 1850s. And Viollet-le-Duc continued the project. And so one of the last things that he did was to reconstruct the spire with the figures on the base of it that were luckily removed recently for restoration, so are now part of the destruction.
I just want to interrupt for just a moment to let you know this is a rough translation of what we have been listening to there in the control room. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, telling people that the next hours will be difficult. Thanks to the firefighters' courage, we will get through it. The president going on to express his sympathies to the Catholic community and thanking all of the people of Paris. He said, Notre Dame of Paris is our cathedral. The history of Notre Dame is our history. It's been there through all our big moments, war, liberation. It is the epicenter of our life. Kevin, can you add to that? What has this meant to not just the people of Paris, but to the broader country of France, this building?
Right. So it was really in the 19th century that architects, government officials who began a concerted restoration campaign of Notre Dame and other important monuments in France began to make the argument that cathedrals, the important ones, were not just religious monuments, but they were monuments to the French nation. Viollet-le-Duc and others argued that they had come into being at the moment that the French nation was coming into being, and that they represented a particularly French architectural expertise, ability to build amazing things out of stone. And so in the late 19th century, Eiffel was seen as the kind of legacy of that. Here they were building out of iron, another new material. So the French mason of the Middle Ages was thought of as a kind of precursor of the modern engineer, somebody who was incredibly daring, incredibly resourceful, smart, able to do really unprecedented things building in stone. And that was seen as a national achievement, not just a Catholic achievement, although, of course, there were always Catholic, commentators and theologians and clergy and so on who saw it very much as an expression of piety. But there was also a whole second way of thinking about it that was secular, that thought of the building as evidence of a particularly French ability to build something impressive out of stone. So it got that meaning in the 19th century. It continued to have it through the 20th century, all the upheavals and wars.
So this structure's place as a point of pride really has been something that has existed here for decades, perhaps hundreds of years in some respects. Because it's not just something that was thought of as belonging to the people of Paris, but belonging to all of France, it sounds like you're saying.
That's right.
And so when you think about now, the effect that this fire, understanding all of that context and understanding all of that history, when you think about the effect of watching this building that has stood for hundreds of years burn, what will that do you think, to those people who did view it as very much a symbol of what it means to be French?
Well, I mean, that's an open question. So, for example, in World War I, the Cathedral of Reims was hit by bombing by the Germans, and the destruction of its roof in a huge fire became a point of unification and a point of bringing people together around what was a very powerful symbol. So even though Notre Dame is destroyed, I think it's, what happens to it going forward could be a source of coming together.
All right, Kevin Murphy, thank you so much for your insight, Kevin. And we're going to take a quick break. We'll have much more from Paris in just a moment. But first, here's what President Trump had to say earlier today after learning about the fire tearing through Notre-Dam.
Terrible, terrible fire. You probably saw, some of you have heard, some of you have not because you've been here. But I will tell you the fire that they're having at the Notre-Dam Cathedral is something like few people have witnessed. When we left, we had a whole group of your great representatives, and when we left the plane, it was burning at a level that you rarely see a fire burn. It's one of the great treasures of the world, the greatest artists in the world. Probably, if you think about it, I would say, Jovita, it might be greater than almost any museum in the world, and it's burning very badly. It looks like it's burning to the ground. So that puts a damper on what we're about to say, to be honest, because that is beyond countries, that's beyond anything. That's a part of our growing up, it's a part of our culture, it's a part of our lives. That's a truly great cathedral. And I've been there and I've seen it, and there's no cathedral. I think I could say there's probably no cathedral in the world like it. It's a terrible scene. They think it was caused by, at this moment they don't know, but they think it was caused by renovation. And I hope that's the reason. Renovation, you know, what's that all about? But it's a terrible sight to behold.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of this still developing story, a massive fire burning through Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris. Joining me now on the phone is Barbara Baim. She is the Paul and Jill Ruddock Senior Curator for the Met Cloisters. Thank you so much, Barbara, for being with us. As we continue to watch this situation unfold, I wonder what's going through your mind as someone who is well familiar with the history, with the art, that was contained in that cathedral.
It's pretty excruciating, and I don't think that's because it's my area. It's the kind of thing I spend all day thinking about at work. Mm-hmm. I think it's true for everyone. It's such an icon of not only of Paris, not only of France, but it's really a great icon of civilization and of the best aspirations of people.
One of the things that we heard from authorities there in Paris is that with respect to some of those artworks contained inside, that they were able to save some, although it's not clear to what extent at this point. Mm-hmm. From that perspective, what are the questions that you would have?
Well, the first question I have is whether everyone was safely evacuated from the building, because the building is, especially it's Holy Week, that building is packed at all times, and the first obligation of a Christian community is to take care of the people. So that's the first thing that I'm wondering about, and then I do hope that because the fire began high up, that perhaps there was time for some of the more of the movable